Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 21, The Holy Vehm from A History of Secret Societies by Arkon Daraul. Chapter 20, The Holy Vehm. Westphalia during the Middle Ages was subject to very little law and order, but in the middle of the 13th century a mysterious and powerful society, eventually to have at least 100,000 initiates, rose and claimed revenge in the name of society for wrongdoing of almost every kind. The secret courts of the Holy Vehm are surrounded by an extraordinary degree of mystery. Nobody knows what Vehm is derived from or when it was first used. Some say that it is from the Latin fama, fame or repute. Others that it is a corrupted form of the German Fahne, a flag standard. The men who had been through the rites of initiation called themselves the wise, and hence some have seen in the word, pronounced Vehm in German, the Arabic Vehm, wisdom, imported during the Crusades by the Germans who went to fight in the Holy Land. Certain it is that the methods of trial and execution were as summary as anything that might have obtained under the special and lawless conditions of the Crusades, when no mean proportion of the participants were dissolute adventurers at best, at worst criminals. In spite of the paucity of documents about the Vehm, there is sufficient information available to show that justice was in its early days generally adequately dispensed, although the cruelty with which it was applied is alien to our present-day thinking. Popular novelists, such as Sir Walter Scott, are said to be mainly responsible for the general impression that the tribunals were held in dark and subterranean places, that the whole proceedings were shrouded in great mystery and danger, that the populace was terrorized by the sinister figures behind the movement. But it should not be forgotten that there are folk legends still surviving which accuse the Vehm of strange barbarities, just as much as there are those which paint the Vehmists with the rosy colors of chivalrous knights. It seems very possible that both types of story are in part true. There is a tradition that some tribunals put their victims to death in a singularly unpleasant manner. The victim was told to go and kiss the statue of the Virgin, which stood in a subterranean vault. The statue was of bronze and of gigantic size. On approaching it so as to touch it, its front opened with folding doors and displayed its interior, set full with sharp and long spikes and pointed blades. The doors were similarly armed, and on each, at about the height of a man's head, was a spike longer than the rest, the two spikes being intended when the doors were shut to enter the eyes and destroy them. The doors having thus opened, the victim by a secret mechanism was drawn or pushed into the dreadful statue, and the doors closed upon him. There he was cut and hacked by the knives and spikes. In about half a minute, the floor on which he stood, which was in reality a trapdoor, opened and allowed him to fall through. But more horrible tortures awaited him, for underneath the trapdoor were 6 large wooden cylinders in 3 pairs. The cylinders were furnished all round with sharp blades. The distance between the uppermost pair of parallel cylinders was such that a human body could just lie between them. The middle pair was closer together and the lowest very close. Beneath this horrible apparatus was an opening in which could be heard the rushing of water. The mechanism that opened the doors of the statue also set in motion the cylinders, which turned towards the inside. Hence, when the victim, already fearfully mangled and blinded, fell through the trapdoor, he fell between the upper pair of cylinders. In this mutilated condition, the quivering mass fell between the second and more closely approaching pair of cylinders, and was now actually hacked through and through on the lowest and closest pair, where it was reduced to small pieces which fell into the brook below and were carried away, thus leaving no trace of the awful deed that had been accomplished. Seal of the Holy Vehm. The Holy Vehm was holy because its first interests was in the upholding of the 10 Commandments and other aspects of the Christian faith. Before long, it seems, the tribunals discovered that almost anything could be construed as affecting the welfare of Christianity, and their scope became wider and wider. As an example of what the members of the society thought about their powers, we have a document recording their decision at Amesburg in 1490 as to their main scope. They were determined to proceed against: 1. Those who revealed the secrets of Carolus Magnus. 2. Those who practiced or introduced heresy. 3. Those who fell from the faith and became heathens. 4. Those who committed perjury. 5. Those who practiced witchcraft or magic or entered into any treaty with the evil one. 6. Those who revealed the secrets of the Society of the Holy Vehm. These were the subject of the deliberations of the secret tribunal of the Vehm. The public tribunal of the same body was concerned with 1. Willful injuries to churches and churchyards. 2. Theft. 3. Epar. 4. Robbery of women in childbirth. 5. Public treason. 6. Highway robbery. 7. Arbitrary persons. 8. Secret and open manslaughter and murder. 9. Wandering vagabonds. 10. Those who committed sacrilege. Other lists have also been discovered containing such items as a determination to proceed against those who act against honor and justice and are therefore not to be answered in honor. By these provisions, almost the whole populace of the immense area of medieval Westphalia was virtually in the hands of the Vehm. There were odd exceptions. Because of sex and age, women and children did not come within their competence. Jews, heathens and the like could not be tried because they were beyond the pale of such an important and sanctified body. Nobles were exempted because they had to be tried by the universal custom of the Middle Ages by their peers, and it was not practicable to find enough people of the same quality to try them. The Vehm considered itself incompetent to try members of the clergy. Expediency is said to have been the reason for this provision. It was probably as obvious to the Westphalians as it is to the reader that membership of the Vehm could be a highly desirable thing. It conferred a status such as few other attainments could in those very unsettled and terrifying days. The main body of the society were the Schoppen, who were recruited after being nominated by a lord of the tribunal and undergoing initiation ceremonies. Until such time as he was properly admitted, the Schoppen was known as ignorant when enrolled, as wise or knowing, Wissender. In his initiation, the candidate had to appear bareheaded before the assembled tribunal and answer questions as to his qualifications. Then, kneeling with his thumb and forefinger on a naked sword and a halter, he swore his great oath before the count of the society. I swear on the holy marriage that I will from henceforth aid, keep and conceal the holy Vehms from wife and from child, from father and from mother, from sister and from brother, from fire and wind and from all that the sun shines upon and the rain covers, from all that is between sky and land, especially from the man who knows the law and will bring before this free tribunal under which I sit all that belongs to the secret jurisdiction of the emperor, whether I know it to be true myself or have heard it from trustworthy people, whatever requires correction or punishment, whatever is fame-free, that it may be judged or with the consent of the accuser put off in grace, and will not cease to do so, for love or for fear, for gold or for silver or for precious stones. And I will strengthen this tribunal and jurisdiction with all my 5 senses and power, and that I do not take on me this office for any other cause than for the sake of right and justice. Moreover, that I will ever further and honor this free tribunal more than any other free tribunals, and that what I thus promise I will steadfastly and firmly keep, so help me God and his holy gospel. The allusion to the emperor was made because the Vehm considered itself directly under the monarch, whether he liked it or not. It is not to be supposed that he always did like it. In 1470, the Vehm summoned the Emperor Frederick himself to appear before their courts, under penalty of being held to be a disobedient emperor. And although he did not do so, he swallowed the insult. The Vehm tribunals had a habit of spreading from one district to another, but it can be said to their credit that they did not always do so without warning. In the year 1608, says a manuscript life of Duke Julius of Chelles, when the Vehm law was to be put into operation, all the inhabitants of the district who were above 12 years of age were obliged to appear without fail on a heath or some large open place and sit down on the ground. Some tables were then set in the middle of the assembly at which the prince, his councillors and bailiffs took their seats. The secret judges then reported the delinquents and the offences, and they went round with a white wand and smote the offenders on the legs. Whoever then had a bad conscience and knew himself to be guilty of a capital offence was permitted to stand up and to quit the country within a day and a night. But if he was struck the 3rd time, the executioner was at hand. A pastor gave him the sacrament, and away with him to the nearest tree. The general procedure of these bizarre courts, once they had been established in the land, was fierce and without any waste of time. The first thing that happened was that the accusation had to be made by a member, a Freischop, upon which an order for the appearance of the defendant was issued. If he did not present himself, he was hounded. If during the period of his absence, the accuser could produce 7 witnesses to the fact that the accuser was a person whose word could be believed, the case was considered proved, the charge was not gone into. The imperial ban was pronounced by this terrible court. Sentences were always the same. The sentence was one of outlawry, degradation, and death. The neck of the convict was condemned to the halter, and his body to the birds and the wild beasts. His goods and estates were declared forfeit, his wife a widow, and his children orphans. He was declared fembar, punishable by the Vehm, and any 3 initiated that met with him were at liberty, nay, enjoined, to hang him on the nearest tree. If the defendant had the courage to appear before the court, he found himself before a court whose table held a naked sword and a halter of osier. He could bring 30 friends as witnesses and could be represented by their attorneys. He also had the right of appeal to the general chapter of the secret closed tribunal of the imperial chamber, held at Dortmund. As soon as final death was pronounced, however, he was immediately hanged. An accused person who did not appear before the tribunal, himself being a member of the organization, was sentenced to death immediately and hanged where found. Although the ban was made in the name of the emperor and appeals could be made to him, the ruler was not allowed to be present at the Dortmund sessions unless himself initiated. Anyone who found his way accidentally to a meeting of the secret tribunals was immediately seized and hanged. Anyone who warned a person that he was under sentence was similarly treated. Each emperor at his coronation at Aix-la-Chapelle was formally initiated by the hereditary Count of Dortmund. The Archbishop of Cologne, who had certain Vehm rights, must also have been initiated, or he would not have been allowed to have exercised them. The secret Vehm judges who dwelt among the general populace were in some places reputed to be quite human. Although not allowed to warn anyone verbally or in writing that he might be subject to proceedings of the society, they might make some sort of sign that they were watching him. This sometimes took the form of a mark on his door, or passing a can near him at a drinking party. One old law book gives the Brunswick procedures of the Vehm court. The feminotes were selected secret informants who watched the citizens and passed information about suspect persons to the councils of the Vehm. If conditions were said to be bad in any particular place, a day was appointed for holding a Vehm court there. Members of the council from various parts of the town or other area would meet at midnight and arrange for every entrance to be blocked. At daybreak, the citizens were informed that the court was to sit, and all had to repair to a designated spot at a certain time. When the bell had tolled 3 times, all who had assembled accompanied the council through the gate of St. Peter, out of the town of Brunswick to what was called the Vehm ditch. Here they separated. The council took their stations on the space between the ditch and the town gate, the citizens on the other side of the ditch. The feminotes now mingled themselves among the townsmen, inquiring after such offences as had not come to their notice, and communicated whatever information they obtained and also their former discoveries, if they had not had time to do so in the night, to the clerk, to be put by him into proper form and laid before the council. Now the alleged offences were examined. Those which were under the value of 4 shillings were excluded from the deliberations. Those who had had goods stolen from them were first examined and asked whether they knew the thief. If they did not, they had to swear by the saints that they spoke the truth. If they named anyone and it was the first charge against him, he could clear himself by an oath. If, however, it was the second charge, he had to bring 6 others to swear along with him. Now he had to wash his hands in water and undergo the trial of the hot iron. A piece of metal, heated to glowing red, was picked up by the accused, who had to carry it for 9 paces without his flesh being burned, to establish innocence. Another Vehm court, described by one writer, has been said to have existed only in the imagination. Under the castle of Baden are labyrinthine vaults, formerly, we are told, consecrated to secret Vehm rituals and trials. Those who were brought before this awful tribunal were not conducted into the castle vaults in the usual way. They were lowered into the gloomy abyss by a cord in a basket and restored to the light, if so fortunate as to be acquitted, in the same manner, so that they never could, however inclined, discover where they had been. The ordinary entrance led through a long dark passage which was closed by a door of a single stone as large as a tomb, stone. This door revolved on invisible hinges and fitted so exeodly that when it was shut, the person who was inside could not distinguish it from the adjoining stones or tell where it was that he had entered. It could only be opened on the outside by a secret spring. Proceeding along this passage, you reached the room where you saw hooks in the wall, thumb screws, and every species of instruments of torture. A door on the left opened into a recess, the place of the maiden's kiss. Proceeding on farther, after passing through several doors, you came to the vault of the tribunal. This was a long, spacious quadrangle hung round with black. At the upper end there was a niche in which were an altar and crucifix. In this place the chief judge sat. His assessors had their seats on wooden benches along the walls. Another writer says that this description is fanciful, not because any of the details of the place are challenged, but because there is no document extant which states that such courts were held in this place or under these conditions. For these reasons, some say that the place described might in fact be a relic of the Inquisition. Whether absence of documents can be considered a proof for or against anything is an interesting point. Although the courts were greatly respected, and probably because they administered the sort of rough justice which was required in those days, it was not long before the Holy Vehm became a word of such terror that people crossed themselves whenever they passed any place associated with its sittings. People of the most dissolute character were admitted in the end to its membership, and one writer of the time with considerable daring states that those who had authority to hang men were hardly deserving to keep pigs, that they were themselves worthy of the gallows if one but cast a glance over their lives. Several notorious cases which are recorded show just how far things had gone. Duke Ulrich of Württemberg was unhappily married. A powerful young nobleman named Hans Hutten at his court was friendly with the Duchess Sabina and was incautious enough to show off a ring which she had given him. Enraged at his lady's unconcealed liking for the youth, the Duke, at a hunting party in the forest, ran Hutton through and hanged the body with his belt. When the murder was discovered, he stated that he had been told to commit it as a sentence of the Holy Vehm. Eventually the truth came out, but the case ended with the Duke and the Hutton family coming to an accommodation. The foregoing case, it is said, showed at the time that the tribunals would have allowed the Duke to get away with the murder had the Emperor not intervened. A worse case was the one of Christian Kerkerink. The Vehm tribunal of Munster had been told that he was an adulterer. Instead of trying him or sending him any sort of warning, they sent men to get him out of bed in the middle of the night. Their representatives lured him out on some pretext, took him to a lonely place and informed the council, which assembled at daybreak. When they appeared, he begged for a lawyer. This being refused, he was sentenced to death without further ado. The condemned man asked for a stay of execution of one day to settle his affairs and make his peace with God. This request was summarily rejected, and he was told that he might now make a confession and that a priest was in attendance to receive it. He made one more appeal for mercy. As a concession, his judges said that they would have him beheaded and not hanged. A monk was called over to hear his confession. As soon as it was over, the executioner, who had been sworn never to reveal anything that he had seen, was sent forward to strike off his head. Meanwhile, word had somehow spread in the town, and the people poured out to watch the last act of the tragedy. Guards carefully posted prevented them from seeing anything, and all that they found when the tribunal withdrew was the body in a coffin. These terrible courts were never formally abolished. They were reformed by various monarchs, but even in the 19th century, it was said that they still existed, though very much underground. The Nazi werewolves and resistance organizations fighting the communist occupation of East Germany claimed that they were carrying on the tradition of the chivalrous and Holy Vehm. Perhaps they still are. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.